You're watching VinylicPumaGaming. What's going on, guys? Back with another Borderlands 2 countdown video, and today we will be going over the top 10 best wall textures in Borderlands 2. So without further ado, let's go ahead here and we'll start with number 10, and that's going to be the one wall in Sanctuary that I really like. Alright, I felt that it would be a good time to make fun of myself a little bit. I've been making a ton of Borderlands 2 countdown videos lately, and it's about time that I just did a plain old regular commentary on Borderlands 2, reminiscing about what once was and how I wish we never lost it. Though I ultimately understand why we lost it, it's just a shame that we did. So as I'm probably sure you could probably tell from this video's thumbnail as well as the title, I'm going to be talking about Borderlands 2's modded guns and weapons and why I personally think that they were awesome. So I guess we'll go ahead and we'll just jump into it. Depending on your point of view, I think one of the best and worst things about Borderlands 2 was and still is the duping exploits. About 4 years ago around this time, I was playing Borderlands 2 on my Xbox 360 through Xbox Live, and I always remember that whenever anybody saw a really awesome weapon that someone else had, like a Norfleet, or even really good like regular items like the B-Shield, Sham, and others, people would ask to dupe each other's guns and items. Now usually this was done by dual duping, where one person would get an item, they would enter a duel with another person with the item that they wish to dupe equipped, then as soon as the duel starts, the person with the dupable item would quickly equip something else, then they would drop the item that they wanted to dupe, and then the other player would kill them to get a duplicated copy, and both players would get a copy of the item that they wanted. There was, and I guess there still is, dashboard duping, which exploits the way the game saves. Provided that you aren't the host, a player can enter a game, toggle their badass rank on and then off, or off then on, and then they can drop all of their items. Then the player can dashboard out of the game, and because your character isn't saved when you dashboard out, you can effectively duplicate your entire inventory if you wanted to. Even items that aren't equipable, like heads and skins, are dupable this way. On the one hand, being able to dupe your guns was amazing. If you went up against somebody like Vermivorous with a couple of friends and you actually got a Norfleet to drop, everyone could get that Norfleet. Absolutely no one was left out, and no one had to worry about loot ninjas. And because anyone could essentially duplicate any item, this eliminated the bullshit tactics that people use in games like Diablo, where they try to use the trade window to scam you into giving them your best items. On the other hand, the ability to dupe weapons meant that no item in Borderlands 2 has ever had any real value. Perhaps skins and heads were valuable at first, but as soon as people discovered how to dashboard dupe, those items also became virtually worthless. Another issue with duping was that any item or weapon could be spread extremely quickly at exponential rates. If you wanted a perfect B or Sham shield, you can dupe yours for 4 players. Then each of those players could dupe theirs for up to 16 players, which could become 64, 256, then 1024, and so on. Within a short span of time, a significant number of the higher level player base would have all the best weapons in the game. Duping also allowed players to spread modded weapons far beyond the initial 4 players that would encounter those weapons. Part of the reason that certain modded items like explosive Norfleets or Malawan weapons with the elements removed, trickshot infinities, unkempt heralds with like the bandit pistol mod and other weapons like that spread so quickly in large part due to duping. If duping wasn't a thing, you would have had to have known somebody directly that was willing to make you these types of weapons with the save editor or take the risk of making these items yourself. Of course, these modded items that passed the sanity check were pretty tame compared to the modded weapons and items that you could make before Digistruct Peak came out. Old school modded weapons for Borderlands 2 were based on hybrids from the very first Borderlands. In the original Borderlands, some unique weapons could spawn with 2 unique weapon parts, essentially combining the attributes of both while also mitigating their weaknesses. One of the most famous hybrids from the original Borderlands was the Ajax Ogre, which combined the Ogre combat rifle accessory with the Ajax Spear combat rifle's barrel. And this ultimately contributed to making a gun that has great accuracy accuracy, high fire rate, low recoil, and base damage that was far above average. And the best part about the Ajax Ogre was that it dropped in-game. One of the major changes Gearbox made for Borderlands 2 was that they chose to define every unique weapon in the game by its weapon barrel. So for example, the Sandhawk is the Sandhawk because it has the Sandhawk barrel for SMGs. And the only weapon I can think of off the top of my head that breaks this trend is the Fremington's Edge, which actually has both the unique barrel as well as a unique scope. And this scope improves weapon zoom and improves critical hit bonus while aiming down the sight. Because Borderlands 2 defines every unique weapon by their barrel, and none of the Borderlands games allow a weapon to spawn with two different barrels, this pretty much ended the possibility of hybrids ever dropping in Borderlands 2. So what actually happened when a modder for Borderlands 2 made a modded item was they usually combined barrels from different weapons together in a save editor, and this ultimately made a hybrid weapon. Some modders also took this to the extreme by combining multiple barrels together, and you could get some really interesting effects, like pistols that would shoot like a Nukem projectile, or you could get even crazier things like a Blockhead Norfleet with infinite ammo. Unlike the normal Norfleet, this one didn't lag the crap out of your game if you were playing on 360 or PS3. Now, while it was true that making these weapons technically broke the terms of service for the console versions of Borderlands 2, the only thing that severely curtailed the spread of these weapons was the implementation of a sanity check on the player character's backpack. And if you wanted to use these guns, you had to place them in your bank before you saved and quit. Otherwise, the game would automatically delete the item upon loading your character into a new game. This actually had major advantages for players that didn't like using modded gear in their games. For starters, if some random player joins your game with the intent of using modded gear, they could only access their weapons by going to Sanctuary and withdrawing them from the bank. If you never went to Sanctuary, they couldn't ever access their modded items. And even if you did go to Sanctuary and these players got access to their items, the host could kick them and they would lose all of the modded items that they had equipped upon entering another lobby. So if you wanted to use modded items, it was in your best interest to do so with people you knew or you were previously acquainted with. Because if you did play with randoms, the likelihood of losing your stuff was a lot higher. Now, as some of you probably already know, depending on how long you've been playing this game for, modded weapons were ultimately phased out with the District Peak DLC patch, which added a sanity check that was on both the player's backpack and to the bank. And this meant whether you were using modded weapons on PC, 360, or PS3, all of them would be deleted upon downloading the new update for the game, and this update essentially killed modded weapons. While you can still create and use modded weapons if you're playing on the PC, and there are a few modded weapons like Trickshot Infinities that can exist on all platforms, the large community that was dedicated to making modded weapons is gone and they've moved on. Honestly, I think the death of Borderlands 2's modding community for hybrid weapons was a shame. For the players that understood how to make these weapons and items, there were some really interesting creations that they came up with. You had things like Banshee class mods for Maya that would boost her fleet skill by like 22 skill points. It was absolutely ridiculous. When this was combined with the Rough Rider, you could run across a large map like the Iridium Blight in under like 10 seconds. And players also managed to create jump guns, which were based around the Bada Boom launcher. And instead of having to play Salvador to get massive air and combine and properly time your grenade throws with your proper jumping and stuff, you could basically just point this gun down and launch yourself like 100 feet up into the air. It was really cool. Another thing that was really cool were the slow motion or low gravity weapons created by modders like Deftoned and Ultimate Attacker. These weapons combine the attributes of several different weapons with slow projectile speed together to get weapons with like this ridiculously slow projectile speed. And in the case of guns with ricochet bullets like the Madhouse or the Blockhead, these effects are really pronounced. And you'll also find that this is the case with weapons that have unique projectiles when fired, so something like the longbow or the 12-pounder. Even some rocket-based weapons like the Kerblaster, Norfleet, and Bada Boom also look pretty good with this mod. The thing about Borderlands 2 is there really isn't a whole lot to do once you've beaten the entire game with every character and acquired every single weapon that you want. Sure, you could do endless Digistruct peak runs, you could try to speed kill raid bosses, or you could impose challenges on yourself like playing through the game without dying. And don't get me wrong, those things can be fun sometimes. Beating normal mode and getting close to beating true Vault Hunter mode without dying was a very satisfying experience for me. However, learning to make your own modded weapons was something that a fair number of people were doing that provided players that had beaten the game multiple times something else to do than just run the same raid bosses over and over just to get the same loot over and over again. At a certain point, you're going to want more than what the initial Borderlands 2 experience offers, and the insane amount of DLC released for Borderlands 2 I think is a testament to that. I also think if duping wasn't really a thing, you wouldn't have to worry about people playing with mods mixing with people that don't want to play with mods. In fact, if Gearbox only allowed the sanity check to be removed for private lobbies only, and you couldn't dupe any weapons, I think that would have significantly curtailed the distribution of a lot of these guns. Plus, players that wanted to play through the game without cheating could still join a game without encountering people using modded items. At least theoretically. Something that I think Gearbox has been missing out on for a long time is mod support. The fact is that since its inception, modding Borderlands in various forms has been popular. Right now, members of the Gearbox forums are working on a 5th DLC for the original Borderlands called The Dust Wastes. And before that, the original Borderlands had mods like cryo weapons, and then of course there were other mods like Oasis, the Valley of Death, Doom Docks, and there are some more too. As we've discussed in this video, while you couldn't really create your own levels for Borderlands 2, you were able to create your own weapons thanks to save editors and the lack of a sanity check on the bank. I guess one of the prevailing theories as to why Gearbox doesn't want to add mod support to the Borderlands games is because they're afraid it will affect the sales of DLC. The thing is, Gearbox has resources that modders simply don't have, and if substantial add-ons are created, people will pay money for them. And I think a great example of this is Fallout 4. The DLCs that people liked for Fallout 4 were the DLCs like Automatron, Far Harbor, and Nuka World, and that was because they were big campaign DLCs with some story. And the DLCs that people didn't like were the settlement DLCs because a lot of those things were fulfilled by the modding community. Another theory that I have has to do with the genre that Borderlands is generally considered to be a part of. Loot-based games typically have economies and rely on online accounts to make them work. For example, Diablo 2 had an economy where all items had a specific value. People traded Stone of Jordan rings and used them as the game's currency, largely because the in-game currency wasn't worth anything. And while I haven't played Destiny or The Division, I suspect that those games revolve around a similar system, more or less. Plus, if you were able to create weapons right off the bat as soon as you started playing, it seems like that would undermine the idea of acquiring in-game items. Then again, there are people that purchase games like Skyrim and Fallout that never actually complete the main quest and simply mess around playing with various mods that they've downloaded. While Borderlands 2's life cycle is pretty much done, I'd like to see modding come back in Borderlands 3. Failing that, I definitely would like to see hybrids come back as legitimate weapons that the player can acquire. Guns like the Ajax Ogre, the Dove Hornet, and Nemesis Invader were really cool, and the ability to have weapons spawn with 2 unique weapon parts would make Borderlands 3 really awesome, in my opinion. Especially if this functionality got added in an update to the game about 6 months or so after release. I guess we'll see what happens in the future, but for now, I can at least remember the good old days of Borderlands 2's modded hybrids. Alright guys, that's going to wrap up this particular video. If you like this video, please be sure to leave a like, and as always, take care, and I'll see y'all next time.